Steve, you never let me down. Same seat every time. See Stephanie in her seat? Sherman? So what? Yeah. So good afternoon. I think as we all know, here in the Commonwealth, Massachusetts was hit very hard and very early by the pandemic, and as a result, the Massachusetts economy was turned upside down, and workers everywhere had to make painful decisions and adjustments. This is especially true for anybody working in, managing, or owning and operating a retail business, an entertainment restaurant, or a hospitality industry. There have also been places where the spread has been particularly tough to manage in some of our gateway cities, and our businesses and our main streets and many of our downtowns, while they are back up and running, they all still have a very long way to go to get back to what might look like normal. That's why today our administration is announcing the advancement of a $774 million economic recovery plan. The plan, we believe, can help stabilize in many parts of the Commonwealth growth that's already started to take place and hopefully kickstart it in other parts of the state as well. Overall, these funds will be invested to get people back to work, to assist impacted small businesses, to revitalize main streets, to foster innovation, and to promote and provide neighborhood stability and housing equity. To be clear, there's no substitute for the size and scope that a federal aid package could deliver, but that doesn't seem to be in the offing, and we certainly don't believe that we can wait. This package includes almost $43 million in federal, trust, and other state funding. It also includes about $120 million that we included in our revised budget that was filed with the legislature last week, and the $171 million that we committed to help people stay housed through our Eviction Diversion program. In addition, it also includes $323 million in capital and workforce training spending and funds out of our Competitiveness Trust Fund. Much of the funding in these categories is designated to programs and initiatives that have a proven track record of success. About $175 million of the $775 million requires us to work collaboratively with the legislature to get their sign-off, and we look forward to working with them to get that authorized as soon as we can. I know our colleagues there share a sense of urgency to pass the elements that are part of our budget there to get these dollars and put them to work for the people of Massachusetts. But right away, we have about $115 million available for small businesses and workforce development, including more than $25 million to get people back to work. In 2019, small businesses in Massachusetts employed 1.5 million workers and accounted for about 45% of the total Massachusetts workforce. This package allows us to leverage new and existing programs to give small businesses capital support and technical assistance. Today, through the Mass Growth Capital Corporation, we're making $51 million available for small business grants. These grants are designed to help the state's most vulnerable businesses and their workers. Small businesses can apply now, that means now, at the MGCC website, empoweringsmallbusiness.org. We've made revitalizing downtowns a priority since this pandemic began by implementing multi-million-dollar programs like shared streets, local recovery planning grants, and mylocalma.com. This plan includes additional resources for cities and towns through recovery grants and support for Main Street development. Lieutenant Governor Polito and Secretary Keneally will get into more of the details on this in just a minute. We're also investing in our workforce to help people reskill or skill up where we know employment opportunities are available. That includes jobs that previously existed and those that have come up as a result of the pandemic, which Secretary Acosta will talk about in a minute. The pandemic has brought with it drastic change in many ways, but these changes also have presented, in some cases, opportunities. To ensure Massachusetts is positioned to take advantage of these opportunities, we're investing significant resources in skill programs like the Career Technical Initiative, that we launched earlier this year and workforce skills capital grants. Training programs for manufacturing and advanced manufacturing are also a focus and will continue to help with job matching through mass hire and the Learn to Earn program. We've also seen that access to housing comes hand in hand with economic stability and success. To provide support for that stability, we're building on the $171 million eviction diversion program that we announced last week and continue to invest $121 million to build affordable housing in our mass rental rounds. Thanks to incredible efforts on behalf of the courts, housing advocates, and countless community organizations, these funds will ensure an equitable process to avoid housing instability. In addition to that, Massachusetts has always been a leader in innovation, and the intelligence and ingenuity of our people is already helping to lead the way toward economic recovery. Today's plan looks to capitalize on some of Massachusetts' strengths. Through organizations like the Life Science Center and the Mass Tech Collaborative, we'll invest in science and technology sector growth around the state. We'll continue to spend capital on research and development infrastructure, shifting supply chains, and advanced manufacturing. The industry partnerships we have with the folks in these fields are important to making sure that Massachusetts continues to be a world leader in innovation. Now, separate from the $775 million we're talking about today, we do have an economic development bond bill that remains a major priority for us and includes important funding that will help accomplish additional goals that were set forth in our Partnership for Recovery plan. We filed a $275 million capital package with the legislature. It was designed to position the state to fund the production of transit-oriented and climate-resilient affordable housing, as well as neighborhood stabilization efforts to support revitalizing underutilized properties in urban downtowns, the tourism industry, and small and rural communities, and will continue our efforts on advanced manufacturing, broadband, and emerging technology sectors such as robotics and artificial intelligence. We greatly appreciate the ongoing discussion and collaboration we're having with the House and the Senate on that bill, and we look forward to seeing that one get done so that we can add it to the tools in the toolbox to continue to help people find their way back to productive employment or sustain the employment they've managed to put together post-spring. Throughout the pandemic, the downtown small businesses and individuals have lost a lot and have been top of mind for all of us in our administration. Small business owners have been resilient, resourceful, creative, imaginative, and patient, and many have been committed hard to the safety protocols and standards that we put in place to protect their workers and their customers and to help us get the economy moving again and sustain their and our progress. These businesses and workers that make up our downtowns are owned and operated by many of our friends and neighbors. They need our help, and their need is significant. These programs will help those individuals and businesses facing the steepest challenges, but we can all do our part by continuing to buy, shop, and dine locally. And I want to turn it over to the Lieutenant Governor who can talk more about the details with respect to some of the downtown and retail stuff.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Governor. As former municipal officials, Governor Baker and I recognize the strength of our economy depends on the vitality of each and every one of our 351 cities and towns. Since entering office, we have been proud to work closely with our local leaders to identify and solve the unique challenges facing their communities. Today, I'd like to highlight some of the resources our administration is providing to support municipalities and main streets as we continue to fight COVID-19. As the Governor said, the pandemic has been especially challenging for our downtowns and our town centers, as well as the businesses that comprise them. In response, we launched recently the Shared Streets and Spaces program to help communities adapt and support local businesses, and we've in fact toured and visited some of these places to see the creativity and the innovations and the redo of some parts of our downtowns and main streets. Cities and towns have demonstrated their creativity in leveraging these relatively small dollars to really make a difference by installing barriers and infrastructure to promote safe outdoor dining and experiences in parking spaces and places that you normally wouldn't see seating and tables. So far, more than $10 million has been awarded to fund 124 projects in 103 municipalities across the Commonwealth. So building on the success of this initiative, and part of the success is attributed to the design of the program being easy to apply for and a fast turnaround of the dollars to get to the end consumer. We are announcing that an additional $10 million in shared streets and spaces funding will now be available to our municipalities. In our constant discussions with local leaders, we are also identifying the need to create plans tailored to the challenges facing their communities. So as a result, we are launching the Local Recovery Planning Grant Program, making $10 million available directly to all municipalities as they develop and implement their plans to ensure a strong recovery in their community. Using the Department of Housing and Community Development's Mass Downtown Initiative as a vehicle, these grants will support these planning efforts, such as local market assessments, marketing strategies, systems upgrades, and the redesign of public spaces to allow for improved social distancing. We look forward to continuing to work closely with our local partners to help them implement these plans and ensure that every community has the resources it needs now more than ever. In addition to these new grants, we plan to leverage more than $115 million to existing capital programs toward small business and downtown recovery for our communities. This includes more than $100 million in the MassWorks infrastructure funding, as well as a collective $10 million in brownfields, site readiness, and the Transformative Development Initiative and Collaborative Workspace funding. So all different programs that community officials are very aware of and have been very resourceful in stacking up to bring these dollars to their communities, and we'll continue to work through that with them. These programs already, as I've said, play a key role in strengthening communities of all sizes, rural, suburban, urban, all across our Commonwealth, and they will be critical to the recovery in our communities. Our administration also recognizes the new challenge created by the shift to remote work and education caused by the pandemic, which so much of our business and educational activity is now taking place. So reliable internet access has become essential. To ensure widespread, equitable access to the web, our plan offers $9.2 million in new funding to support internet connectivity across our Commonwealth. This includes $6.2 million to extend and expand the Massachusetts Broadband Institute's existing hotspot program, which provides internet access to unserved and underserved areas in Western Mass. This service, announced in April, provides free internet access to unserved and underserved areas in the Western Massachusetts area, giving residents the resources they need to conduct business and attend classes. The plan also includes $2 million to create a cellular hotspot loaner program, as well as $1 million to provide internet access and devices for populations in need. We need to make sure that in a virtual setting, people stay connected to learn and to work. So altogether, these investments will provide municipalities with the resources they need to support a strong recovery for all. We are grateful to the continued partnership of local leaders and look forward to working together to come out of this stronger than ever. It is now my pleasure to turn this over to Secretary Keneally, and I wish to thank all of the secretaries for their hard work on this initiative. Secretary Keneally.
Well, thank you, Governor, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you to my fellow cabinet members, Secretaries Acosta and Heffernan, for being here today and for your role in making this plan possible. Thanks also to our friend Joe Kreisberg for joining us here today as well. Last year, we conducted an economic development planning process that included many conversations around the state. Out of those conversations came our economic development plan called Partnerships for Growth that was built around 4 pillars: housing, communities, business competitiveness, and workforce. Our economic situation is now dramatically different than it was when we finalized our plan last December, and it is now time to come forward with a comprehensive plan for economic recovery. Our Partnerships for Recovery plan has at its foundation those original pillars and takes them a step further through what we call 5 recovery imperatives. And they are getting Massachusetts back to work, supporting small businesses, revitalizing our downtowns, supporting housing equity and stability, and fostering innovation. The Lieutenant Governor talked about the downtowns and main streets pieces. Secretary Acosta will cover the workforce initiatives in a few minutes. But I'd like to touch on small business support, innovation, and housing, especially from the perspective of equitable opportunity. Now, prior to this current downturn, the Massachusetts economy was quite strong. Though even then, there were people and communities that we knew were not able to share in the prosperity and growth that had been generated. COVID-19 has only made these gaps more pronounced and the barriers steeper. Enhancing access to capital, space, and networks for women and minority-owned businesses, along with other ways to address some of the core needs of underserved communities, were already part of our agenda before the pandemic, and we have now redoubled those efforts. To generate economic growth amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and to support main streets across Massachusetts, the administration is making $50.8 million in grants of up to $75,000 immediately available today to support the hardest hit small businesses. These funds can be used to cover a number of expenses such as payroll and benefits costs, mortgage payments, rents, utilities, and interest on debt obligations. And as the governor said, businesses in need should visit empoweringsmallbusiness.org to find the applications for those grants, and those applications are available starting today. To ensure that those who need support the most receive help, $8.3 million in new funding will be invested in small business technical assistance. This new funding will increase the capacity and skills of organizations that assist small business owners, especially when language or other barriers exist in gateway cities and for businesses that primarily serve a low-income population. Included in this funding is $2.3 million dedicated to women and minority-owned businesses to provide support around digital and online technology to complement their traditional business models. We must protect our most vulnerable companies, and this funding is for those businesses that have nowhere else to turn. These grants are for business owners who want to stay open or reopen, not only for their own families, but for the families of the workers they employ. Now, let's talk about our innovation economy. We have, for a long time now, been a leader in innovation and creativity in science and technology. And sectors such as life sciences and advanced manufacturing are not only critical to our economic recovery, but also critical to our response to the virus. To ensure that we continue to lead in this space, $62 million in existing capital funding through the Mass Life Sciences Center, the Mass Tech Collaborative, and Mass Ventures is available to support this recovery. And finally, I want to talk about housing. On our team, we were using the term housing crisis long before we knew what COVID-19 was. And the virus has shown us how important stable housing is to staying safe, socially distancing, and continuing to work from home and teach our children. Just last week, we announced $171 million in support of the Eviction Diversion initiative to keep people safely in their homes during the pandemic. This is part of the recovery plan because when you keep people housed, you give them the opportunity to succeed, to get back to work and get back on track. This comprehensive strategy includes funding to help cover rent and mortgage payments, invest in new programs for mediation and legal representation, and provide rapid rehousing if a tenant is evicted. Additionally, the administration continues to invest in growing the state's stock of affordable housing with $121 million through the Affordable Rental Housing Program. Just yesterday, during remarks to a virtual conference of Western Massachusetts developers, the governor helped us to roll out the 2020 round of affordable housing awards with a mix of direct subsidies and state and federal tax credits, we are making possible 19 projects with more than 2,100 affordable units in every region of the state. This award round includes 8 projects that will build new affordable housing for seniors, 5 adaptive use projects that will turn historic buildings into new housing, and 6 projects that will preserve existing affordable housing. All of these efforts to support small businesses that are hurting, to continue to innovate and lead in science and technology, and to build new housing and keep people in the homes they have now will put us on a path to an economic recovery. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Secretary Heffernan. Oh, I'm sorry, Secretary Costa, my bad. There we go.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Secretaries, Joe. Prior to 2020, Massachusetts had never had a single week with more than 35,000 unemployment claims. During the depths of the pandemic, Massachusetts had 10 consecutive weeks of over 35,000 claims. In order to meet that challenge, we had to scale up quickly to ensure that people received needed financial assistance to deal with the unemployment crisis. Now we need to scale up our reemployment services to meet the needs of our economic recovery. From April through August, around 270,000 private sector jobs have been added. That's around 41%, but we still have a long way to go in order to achieve full employment. In order to get people back to work, new investments are being made to build workforce skills, growing training programs and pathways, forging new partnerships between employers and workers, and supporting internet connectivity to facilitate remote work and online career advancement. The more than $21 million available now includes $10.4 million to engage Massachusetts anchor employers by expanding workforce partnerships with large employers in target sectors to create statewide training employment pathways. $9.2 million to subsidize internet for low-income populations and to expand hotspots in unserved and underserved communities. $3.2 million to modernize mass hire virtual pathways to assess and connect UI claimants to appropriate services and supports. $2 million to bolster manufacturing training by purchasing standardized virtual training program to increase workforce for the manufacturing sector. And $300,000 to supplement the $8.4 million we already have in the governor's budget towards the Career Technical Institute to help close the skills gaps for skilled technician jobs and align training to industry needs. I'm really excited about the proactive approach we are taking to be laser focused on reemployment. We're reimagining what it means to give the workforce the tools and resources they need to succeed. And today's announcement is a big step in helping us get back on the road to full employment. Thank you. With that, I'll turn it to Secretary Heffernan.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for the opportunity to be with you today. I'd like to first thank the Governor, the Lieutenant Governor, Secretaries Keneally and Acosta for their efforts. We have all worked closely together to develop this comprehensive plan which will help promote economic growth and development and support small, local, and diverse businesses throughout the Commonwealth. This plan also benefited from our close relationships with numerous federal, state, and local partners, including our colleagues in the legislature, and we appreciate and look forward to their continued support and efforts. As the Governor said, this plan incorporates our recently filed revised House 2 proposal and includes additional investments that build upon this budget recommendation. Our $773 million plan makes use of multiple funding sources, including $175 million in our revised House 2 proposal, $187 million through the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and the COVID supplemental budget was passed this summer, $323 million in capital funding, and $90 million in other planned spending. This plan again supports a variety of critical priorities, including supporting small businesses, getting people back to work, promoting housing equity, opportunity, and stability, and ensuring our economy continues to innovate and lead. We all know that the residents and companies of Massachusetts throughout the Commonwealth are facing historic challenges due to COVID-19. but this plan empowers businesses and employees with new tools and resources, along with existing supports to navigate the changing landscape, allowing them to grow and thrive. We appreciate your time today. And my pleasure to invite Joe Kreisberg to the stage, or to the microphone. Sorry, Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for the invitation to speak today. I'm delighted to be here. I am Joe Kreisberg. I am the president of the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations, and we represent 90 CDCs and nonprofits across the state working to expand economic opportunity. I am also a board member of the Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation, appointed by the governor, and a member of the Coalition for an Equitable Economy. Since the COVID-19 emergency began in March, CDCs have stepped up in countless ways to serve their community, ensuring safe and stable housing, providing food to those in need, offering support, connections to those who are isolated or alone, helping children get the support they need to learn, and helping small businesses survive and recover. Starting in March, we began convening community-based small business support organizations on a weekly basis to share information and foster collaboration. At every step of the way, we worked hand in hand, well, never actually holding hands, with the Baker Administration, Secretary Keneally, and the Mass Growth Capital Corporation. Together, we have helped thousands of businesses secure forgivable federal payroll protection loans and other private and public relief dollars. We have coached small businesses through how to reopen in compliance with the governor's guidelines, help them alter their business operations to maintain profitability or at least minimize losses, and implement new technology and systems to strengthen them for the long term. Along the way, we have seen the enormous challenges these businesses face, and too often the heartbreak that comes with losing a business that was not only a source of income, but a source of pride and purpose. These challenges have hit communities of color particularly hard. Historic and structural racism going back decades and longer created significant racial wealth disparities before COVID. And when a business owner faces a crisis, they rely on their assets and wealth and savings to ride out the storm. So right away, businesses of color were at a significant disadvantage. The PPP program, which helped many, was structured in a way that helped larger, more established firms with stronger banking relationships, again putting businesses of color at a disadvantage. And of course, many of these businesses are located in the very communities hardest hit by COVID, meaning their employees and customers are also struggling. These cumulative and structural inequities require a smart, targeted response like the one being announced by Governor Baker today. These programs outlined in the announcement are designed to reach the businesses most in need of support and to ensure that they get both the financial support and the technical support they need and deserve. This program will help businesses survive what's going to be a tough winter, recover as the economy recovers, and position themselves to secure more federal dollars if and when the federal government ever steps up and provides the relief we need. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Our members and partners are committed to doing everything we can to ensure that our economic recovery leads to a more equitable and inclusive economy for everyone. We thank Governor Baker and the administration for being such terrific partners in that effort. Thank you.
Questions on this for any of us?
Governor, how big of a difference and how quickly will this package make for businesses?
Well, as I said, about 175 million of it we need to work with our colleagues in the legislature to make happen, but the other 600 million in capital funding and state funding and federal resources is basically going to be in play for the next several months, and will be out the door as soon as we can get it out the door based on the rules associated with filing the applications, as Joe and the folks at Mass Growth Capital will, and as some of these other programs play out. But the first thing that's going to happen is the resources associated with the small business grants. People can apply for those today.
And so it's going to make a big difference quickly, is essentially.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this will be, if all goes according to plan, a lot of this will be out of the door before the end of the calendar year.
And how much more of a difference could you make if you did have some more federal funding? You talked about how...
I've talked before about the fact that there is general agreement, if you follow the trains between the House and the Senate in Washington and the administration on a whole series of initiatives, some of which relate to business development and support for job training and unemployed workers, higher education, K through 12 education, and additional resources for municipalities that they can invest in their communities. So there's a surprising amount of agreement there if you actually look at all the bills that everybody's been kicking around. And the thing that's been frustrating to me is, despite that, they haven't been able to come to terms with it. Now, to give you some idea about the difference between, the size of the federal footprint, we're talking today about $775 million. How much PPP money was put to work, was approved in Massachusetts? 14. Yeah, 14.3 billion. I mean, the feds play on a very different level than we do.
Governor, how much vetting would the small business applicants go through? For example, would they have to prove that they'll be more sustainable if they, with this pandemic still moving forward? And also, how will you select? Does somebody have to be hurt harder than the other person to get it?
I'm going to have the LG speak to this. I would have Joe do it, but he's going to be reading the application, so I'm not sure that's such a good idea. You want to do it, Mike? Okay, Secretary.
So a couple of comments on that. We do want to support the businesses and industries hardest hit, and so that would suggest a couple of things. It could mean businesses that have not yet had the chance to reopen, but also businesses that can demonstrate they were particularly hard hit by COVID. When the Masco Capital Corporation stood up a program early on, back in March, it was a $20 million loan program, and that program was first come, first serve. This one, we want to see the applications come in and really try to evaluate where the greatest needs are.
I think what communities are in will matter.
It certainly will, yeah, exactly.
Say that again, just so.
So we'll look at it through, which industries the companies are in and which communities the companies are in. And we are going to prioritize companies run by women, veterans, and minorities.
Will they have to show that they are more sustainable, though, by adjusting their business model? It seems that some people adjusting.
Yeah, I think a lot have done that already, but importantly, it's a grant, not a loan. So.
Question for the governor, whoever can answer it. As far as the demand for the funds, you said in the press conference, apply now, as in right now. I mean, how important is it that these small business owners get on this website and get it in? And are you worried, that this money could run out like overnight, like the low interest loans did in the early days of the pandemic?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that, and Secretary Keneally spoke to this, is the first set of rounds of almost all of the money that came from the state or from the feds was literally first come, first serve. This is going to be a little more targeted and a little more nuanced, and people are going to want to focus on what kind of business it is, where it's located, whether or not it's been able to reopen at all. And we do want to make sure this focuses on some of the communities, downtowns, neighborhoods, and businesses that have been hardest hit from the beginning. So I have a feeling that this process may take a little longer because people are going to focus on certain kinds of applications that represent certain kinds of businesses, particularly with respect to where they are. Yeah. You didn't like your last answer, Mike?
No, I didn't. But companies have 3 weeks to apply, so there's a 3-week window there.
Governor, could you or Secretary Heffernan speak to how this interacts with the budget proposal you made last week? You mentioned $100.7 million is supposed to go to support for small business recovery. Is it separate? Is it part of that?
Yeah, the $175 million that I mentioned that we need to work with the legislature on is in fact the resources that are attached to House 2. And the $275 million I talked about, which was the economic recovery bill that we filed, the bond bill we filed last spring, that's separate, okay? That's on top of the stuff we're talking about today. In a perfect world, we'd find a way to work with the legislature to get the 175 done as part of the House 2 supplemental, which again, I'm kind of hoping we'll see sometime between now and Thanksgiving. And hopefully at some point around then or soon after, it's got to be obviously by the end of the session, we'll get the $275 million bond bill, which we can put to work as well, which would be on top of what we're talking about.
And does that also include the $93 million in grants and technical support, or is that separate from that 175?
I think what I would really like to do with this, because this is a giant quilt of funds coming from a whole bunch of different places that add up here. If people have very specific questions about that, can you take them up with the folks in A&F, because there's literally the sources and uses chart on this is complicated. I don't want to get it wrong. Yeah.
What would you say to some of these small businesses? I've been into a lot of businesses, and sometimes I'm the only one that's been there for hours. They're opening up early, they're closing late. Any sort of message of hope for these business owners that are still doing work every day?
I think the first thing I would say is that we have seen, and I spoke about this yesterday, we have seen foot traffic come back in many downtowns around Massachusetts. And we have seen people actually return to shop at some of the places they used to shop at before the pandemic began. Part of the goal here with both the federal funding, the state funding we put out earlier, and this funding is to help people basically keep the wheels on the bus until such time as people really do return. I mean, part of this is about, a lot of people were very hesitant about going out much at all. And I think over the course of the summer and into the fall, in many places in Massachusetts, if you go for a walk, particularly on a weekend in downtowns, you'll see a lot of foot traffic. For the most part, everybody's wearing a mask and doing the right things. But I think the big challenge here from the beginning has been to get people comfortable with the idea they can go inside a store, a retail establishment, a downtown property of some kind. And that literally is just the best thing I can say about that is there's more of it now than there was last month. There was more last month than there was the month before. But I think we all agree it's a pretty slow process.
Are you worried that could change, though, with the uptick in cases, that people will become less comfortable? The mayor of Boston says he's considering revisiting guidance for these businesses with the uptick happening there.
I think well, first of all, what I heard the mayor of Boston talk about were businesses that weren't abiding by the guidance that's actually in place. And we've talked about the fact that between the ABCC and the Division of Professional Licensure, they've done literally thousands and thousands of inspections over the course of the past several months and have found infractions and violations. And probably I would say that number's in the hundreds, not in the thousands, because most businesses are complying and have issued fines and citations and all the rest. I think the biggest challenge for us all to remember here, and we've also talked about this a number of times, is household transmission, intergenerational transmission. I talked about this last week, is really where we are seeing a lot of the new case growth, which is one of the reasons we've been focusing on this whole notion of people are doing the right things in their formal settings. They're wearing masks when they go to see a downtown business. They're wearing masks when they go to the supermarket. The people they see when they're out and about in the places where we all think of masks and distance as being required, people are doing it. And that's not where we're seeing most of the growth in cases. As we said, a huge portion of the growth in new cases is people between the ages of 19 and 39, and most of that is related to personal contact, in many cases with groups of friends and people that they know, without any of the guidance that we've talked about with respect to distance or masks or anything else being applied. It's not somebody going shopping in a community that they live in where people are doing the right things. That is not where the vast majority of our issues are with respect to growth in new cases.
Governor Boston Public Schools today have gone back to all remote. Are you concerned that that's foreshadowing what may be happening at many other districts around the state, school districts?
One of the things we've tried to do over the course of this pandemic is to learn from the real life experience and the research of others. And the real life experience and the research with respect to schools is overwhelming at this point that schools are not spreaders. The kids in schools are not spreaders of COVID. I mean, there's no better example of that right now than the parochial schools in Massachusetts. They have 28,000 kids, 4,000 employees who have been back in-person learning since the middle of August, and they have a handful of cases. And if you look at the number of kids and faculty who are in either hybrid or in-person learning in our public schools in Massachusetts, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who have now been back in school, either on a hybrid or an in-person basis now for a couple of months, and we have 150, 160 cases out of a denominator that's in the hundreds of thousands. There are research reports. NPR did a terrific report on this just recently, where they gathered data from a series of pretty big longitudinal studies that have been done on schools around the world. And the basic conclusion was schools are not a major source of transmission. And I would hope, which is one of the reasons why we've said, you know, look at the data. Look at the data in your own community. It's why we talked yesterday, and you'll see this in the report that comes out today, about creating asterisks for communities that went red because of a very particular incident in their community. You know, a nursing home, a jail, something like that, a hospital. Why we've said since the beginning that you really ought to look at 3 weeks worth of data, 4 weeks worth of 3 weeks of reports, 4 weeks of data before you draw conclusions about what's actually going on in your community. But there's very little evidence that schools are a spreader.
Should Boston jump the gun, though, with this?
Look, our goal is to try to be supportive and helpful to our colleagues in municipal government. And, you know, I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback this stuff, but I think it's really important that as we get more familiar with this, and it's not just here in Massachusetts, but in other states as well. I mean, I talk to governors in other states in the region on a pretty regular basis. People are not finding schools, K through 12 schools, to be a big issue with respect to spread. And if you look at our colleges and universities, I mean, we're testing a lot more than they're testing in other places. And I think that routine testing on a lot of our colleges, which we put together with the Broad Institute and all the rest, has had a very positive impact on positive test casing. I mean, our colleges and universities aren't seeing the massive increases in positive cases that people were talking about either. And most of the stuff that's involved spread there has happened off campus in, you know, gatherings that have taken place where familiar people are behaving in a familiar way.
Governor, I wanted to ask about those asterisk districts.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to just add that asterisk there and not allow them to maybe move forward and so on effectively reopen it?
I think part of the reason for that was we continue to believe that we need to be consistent with the rules, and that communities can then use the data associated with that to make the decisions that make the most sense for them. And if you, for example, if you go red for a week, right? First of all, we've said 3 weeks worth of reports, 4 weeks worth of data, right? Goal number one. Goal number two is if you go red because you have a nursing home or a federal facility or a congregate care site or something like that, or you're a really small community that popped because 2 families in your community created enough cases to move you into that category, you should incorporate that into the way you think about how you make decisions at the local level.
With broadband, have you identified or heard of any potential target areas here that could benefit still? I mean, are you looking at potential gateway city hotspots or rural parts like in central or western Massachusetts?
I think the answer is to that question about where the broadband and the hotspot stuff would most be effectively applied. Part of the reason we're doing this through the MBI folks is they have a pretty good sense of what's going on in Western Mass. And let's face it, the Lieutenant Governor and I have put a tremendous amount of work into expanding access to broadband in a part of Massachusetts that desperately needs it, and we've made a lot of progress. But installing, you know, permanent infrastructure, which means, you know, poles and lines, that's digging thousands of holes and putting up thousands of poles and stringing lines across, you know, hundreds of miles. And we've made tremendous progress over the last 4.5 years on this. But in the meantime, there are places where we believe targeted efforts around hotspotting could make a big difference with respect to people's ability to access broadband. And we're going to work with the folks we've been working with in Western Mass to figure out where the exact most appropriate locations would be.
Can you give examples of the revitalization of like some of the projects that you're talking about for revitalization, like in downtowns? What would be an example?
Well, the shared streets programs, I think, is a good one. I mean, people benefited tremendously from that over the course of the summer. But I think you're likely to see a lot more on this when we start issuing some of those MassWorks announcements, which will be later this month.
I have a question for Secretary Keneally, I believe. I've seen some reports saying that nationwide, maybe 100,000 or so small businesses have gone out of business, and we've heard things from Mass Restaurants saying up to a quarter of restaurants are gone forever. Is that something that you guys are tracking on a statewide level, or do you have a sense of how bad things are for businesses at this point and how many are gone forever?
Yeah, but we are tracking that. It's not easy to get data on the very smallest companies, but we do have some sense for that. And I think we've seen those numbers as well. But it really speaks to the importance of getting these grants out the door to help these small companies now. And the reality is, if you look at where the PPP dollars went, a very large number of small companies got that money, but we have so many small businesses, it only represents a minority of our smallest companies. And so, credit to the banks for getting the money out the door to support the small businesses, but really, less than half of our smallest companies even apply for that kind of funding. So hence the importance of these grants we're standing up now.
And do you have any numbers for us, on how many small businesses are now?
Not with me, but we can try to dig something up. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Governor, do you plan on watching the debate tonight, and would you cast your ballot for Joe Biden?
I have Zoom calls that run pretty late into the evening, and if I get off them, I'll turn on the TV and watch the debate for a while. I've already made clear that I don't plan to support the president. I didn't vote for him 4 years ago. I see nothing to change my mind.
But would
Thanks.
you vote for Joe Biden?
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.